for stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Andy Ruskell. He's had many visits here. He spent 13 years in the NFL. He was a Steelers linebacker. He was a team captain for 10 years. He was in 7 Pro Bowls. He was the MVP of the NFL in 1971. He has a BS, well-educated, got a BS and a master's in education. He has 15 95-yard touchdown return. That's still a record? Yeah, interception and touchdown return.
It's the longest time any play. Nobody would ran that slow for 35 yards.
Well, a couple more here. He was on the NFL USO team. He visited the troops across the seas. He's a team representative. He's married, lives in Pittsburgh, 2 children, 7 grandchildren, and he's a very successful businessman. Let's give a nice warm welcome to Andy Ruskell.
Thanks, guys. Well, it's great to see you because I realize that many of you are military, guys who have been in combat. How many people were actually in combat? Can you raise your hand? You don't want to do it. I went to the military I was a rookie in 1963. The Steelers made the All-Pro rookie team, and the Steelers said, "You can't go in the military." I said, "Well, I have to. I've told you I got to go." And they said, "No, you can't go. We'll get you out of it." And they did get me out of it, but I said, "No, I'm doing it. I can't do that. I can't do this thing. It's wrong, and I'm going to go." So I went to Germany for the U.S. Army, and I was a lieutenant and there. And of course, now it wasn't a military thing. The most dangerous thing I did in Germany was to drive my Porsche on the Autobahn. But it was just ridiculous. I mean, and they made me a coach of the 7th Corps defense. They had corps football teams in those days. And those corps were 20,000 men. You can get a pretty decent football team from 20,000 men. And so I put in all these Steeler blitzes and we blew everybody off the field. They couldn't figure out what we were doing. Anyway, that was an interesting experience. Then I came back and became a Steeler again. And right away, one of the veteran players said to me, "Russell, you can't ever show your opponent you're hurt. I don't care if you're bleeding or if you've got a broken leg. I don't care. You can't show your opponent you're hurt." Well, that was sort of like Dan Devine, my college coach. He'd say that too. And you gotta play tough, and you gotta play hurt. And the very next game we played was Green Bay Packers, and I went in the game and made a couple of good plays, and one of them was a tackle against their fullback, and his knee hit me in the head. In a bright show, that's you have a concussion when you get that bright flash of light, and you're like, well, what am I going to do? Can I even get up, let alone get back to the huddle? So I got up and I staggered back into the huddle. And Bart Starr said, "No, Andy, you're in the wrong huddle." I was in the Green Bay Packer huddle. It's the only time that ever happened in my life. But I was really embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry, Bart. I went back to the Steelers side, and we made them punt. And when we came off the field, one of my teammates said, "Hey, Doc." And the doctor was sipping all this scotch and whiskey, And he said, "Hey, Doc, you better check Russell. He got dinged." I was like, "Oh no, I hope he doesn't." So the doctor comes over and says, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I said, "What? Are you a boy or a girl?" I said, "I'm a boy." You're fine. Get back in. That was the concussion protocol back in the '60s. Now they'd be out 5 or 6 weeks. No worry about that, but a lot of strange things. I had a dozen concussions, and I was out in Colorado, and we had 2 places out there, and I woke up and the lights above me were just spinning. It was just a dizziness, and I couldn't imagine what was causing it. And I finally got up and fell down because it was so dizzy. And then my wife took me to a doctor. He said, "Well, how many concussions do you have?" I said, 12. He said, "Well, that's probably what caused you to have that problem." But I said, I had one of the things I did after football was to climb 14,000-foot peaks. There's 54 14,000, and I did all of them. But to tell you, some guy did it last year. Did it in 10 straight days. Because he was a runner, and a super gung-ho guy, and he did all 54 14ers. Took me 23 years. But I was doing 3 and 4 and 4 and 5 and that kind of stuff. Flying out from Pittsburgh and renting a car and going to the mountain. But I never got dizzy. I was not that altitude. And those were all higher than Denver. Denver's a mile high. Most of them were higher than that. So it was interesting, and I feel a little bit dizzy now. Even here today, I was concerned I was going to call no, I can't do this speech because I'm got too much going on in my head and spinning, and it's kind of weird. So if I act weird, you know why. Basically, one of the things you probably would ask me, what do you think about the Steelers this year? Well, I can't. I'm really probably very much of you that I'm just. I don't go to the games. I don't watch them there because I prefer to watch them on television, and I turn them off usually at halftime. So yeah, I'm not even watching the full game. So I don't really have any knowledge of the Steelers, how good they are now. It'll be interesting to see how they work out, and I think they could get close to wins, but who knows? So I think what I'd like to do is ask if you have any questions. Give me a point in your hand, John, and see what's going on. Anybody see?
Any questions, guys?
Anybody cares? None?
Here we go.
Where'd you go to college, and what position did you play in college?
I went to the University of Missouri. I was living in St. Louis. I had played high school football in St. Louis, a place called Ladue. And I made All-American football player in high school. And I had 23 scholarship offers, all over the United States, USC, all that. And I didn't want to go to Missouri because it was known as a kind of a bad, it wasn't as good a scholarship type of thing. And the Divine was Dan, the coach was Dan Divine, and he knew how to, and he had the governor calling my dad, the mayor of St. Louis calling my dad. My dad was not a football player. He didn't know a thing about football. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and he had come over when he was 15 or something, and he didn't know anything about football. And he just said, "You can't." He in fact, they had gone. People say, "Well, where'd you grow up?" Well, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. Was there for 6 or 7 years. Moved to Chicago, Evanston, two and a half years there. Then moved to New York, and we were in Pelham Manor for 4 or 5 years. Then we moved to St. Louis, Missouri. This is because my father was a corporate guy he's getting promoted, and there was always like, you got to learn how to make new friends and blah blah blah. And so ended up going to my football in St. Louis, Ladue, and had all these scholarship offers. And my dad said, because he had the governor calling my dad and the mayor calling, and he said, "Son, you need to go to Missouri. You have to go to Missouri." And so I went, and we had good teams, and we were in the top 5 most of the years, and we were a good football team. Dan Devine was the coach, and the interesting thing that I was a running back in high school, and I used to score 4 or 5 touchdowns a game. But I can't take the credit for that because my teammates knocked everybody down. They're doing all the work, right? And I'm just getting the ball and running for touchdowns. So I won the St. Louis scoring thing. I was the top scorer in St. Louis, and that wasn't really fair because my teammates knocked everybody down. But then I decided to go to Mizzou because of all that. And Devine said, "Russell, you're a linebacker. You're not a running back. You're a linebacker." I'm like, linebacker. I don't like to tackle. I don't want to do that. I want to make people miss. He said, no, you're a linebacker. Well, that was a change that was interesting, and of course I got drafted by the Steelers, and that was in the 16th round. And the reason that I think I was that late is because in those days you'd get a thing from the NFL, and it would say, the first question was, are you interested in playing in a professional football? And I wrote no to everyone, because my dad was telling me, you can't do that. You got to be a worker. You know, he's yelling. He's in Brussels, Belgium. And then he also moved to Switzerland also. So I kind of had a wonderful trips around the world as a kid. They let me go anywhere I wanted to go. You know, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok. It didn't matter. You know, so I was a lucky kid. Anyway, so the football teams of Missouri were pretty good, and I think Dan Devine was a very good coach, and he did see something that I was a linebacker, and I never thought I'd be a linebacker, but it happened, and it worked. We have I think we heard that the three linebackers on the Steelers, Ham, Lambert, and me, have an NFL record 24 Pro Bowls. And Lambert had 9. Ham had 8. And I had 7. Of course, I told those stars that if I hadn't spent 2 years in Germany as a lieutenant, I might have had 1 or 2 more. You know, the ego is a terrible thing. But you're trying to get rid of it. But anyway, I thought I could have made maybe 1 or 2 more. But 7 Pro Bowls was fun enough. And any other questions?
Andy, your comment about ego. How is the game that we love going to survive Antonio Brown and his ilk? Is there just too much money in the game these days, or how is teamwork going to survive when ego reigns so high?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't really know the answers to that, but you know, Brown was obviously a terrific receiver and made a lot of big catches for the Steelers, and now he's moved himself down to the Raiders, and he said he was going to punch their coach or their general manager in the face, and he's just an idiot. I mean, I can't imagine that they're not going to get rid of him. I mean, if you had Chuck Noll, he cut you right away, you know, but. Those guys today, there's so much money involved. It's kind of crazy, and we'll see what happens. And also Bell, he went to the Jets, and I thought that who's the other guy, the backup running back for Pitt? Connor. I think Connor's as good as the other guy, but he got hurt late last year and didn't play. So that's easy. Yeah.
Andy, I'd like to hear your opinion of should the NFL go to 18 regular season games from 16?
That's a good question. I really don't know the answer to that. 18 games versus 16.
Body take it.
I thought back in my day it was 14. But, anybody back there has a point?
Andy, as I remember, one of the reasons you were so good is because you outstudied everyone. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'd like to say that I spent a lot of time taking films home, and, you know, and knowing what they would do when they lined up certain formations. And if you know what the opponent's going to do, you can get in there and turn their back and stop. So I did a lot of that kind of thing where they were surprised that I knew what they were doing, and you know, I would just memorize every formation they had. I knew what their favorite thing was, and so that's I talked to Ham and Lambert about that too, because they were very good and they used those same things.
Okay, back here.
Yes.
Andy, as a fellow veteran, would you care to comment at all about the players' decision last year to stay in the tunnel when the national anthem was being played? I know for myself, that's when I turned the TV off, and I haven't watched a game since. Please comment.
I think you're absolutely right. There's no way that should have been approved. You know, that the guy who went down, he should have stood up, and everybody in the team should have stood up and saluted or held their hand to their heart. And that's absolutely the thing that they should have done. So yeah.
Can you tell us what you said to the chief when you went in to get a raise?
They told me that I was the one player that was going to be allowed to talk to the chief was me, because I was the captain for 10 years. So I went into the chief and I started. He said, "Well, what do you want, Russell? What do you think?" You know, real tough thing. And I said, "Well, sir, with all due respect, there were 4 or 5 different linebackers around the NFL who were making 2 or 3 times what I was making, but they were making the same kind of, you know, all pros and that kind of stuff." And I was like, why would that be so different? And the chief said, "Well, all I can tell you is if those coaches are that stupid, they should be, you know." So he just made it laughter of that thing, and I laughed too, because you got to blame. But he was, you know, he said he did give me a nice you know, thing, but it wasn't anywhere near those other guys. Yeah.
Hey, Andy, the Antonio Brown situation brings to mind that Chuck Noll cut a player named Roy Jefferson. What was the impact on the team? Because he was a pretty good player when Noll got rid of him.
Well, that's a good question. Roy Jefferson was very good, and we knew at the time that if a player said stupid things and really was not in favor of the Steelers themselves, then he's going to get cut, and that's what happened to him. So we didn't think that big a deal. What it was. Yeah.
Good morning. I just read the paper this morning, and I want to know how you feel about this. There seems to be, in national figures, there's fewer young gentlemen going out for football in high school and so forth than there has been for years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's interesting, because you know, I would think that the good high school players, that they're looking at that money that these guys are getting. It's unbelievable, you know. And if they got half of it, it would be important, or a third of it would be important. And so I would think that they would not play. They'd want to play because of all that money. They couldn't get a business job that would even come close.
First, I want to apologize. I have to ask this question. Is it true when you ran 95 yards that they flagged you for delay of game?
Well, it's true. It's true that my teammates were just having a ball with that. But what I remember is that I had a sore knee that the Steelers wanted to operate on me, and I said, "No, I'm going to play." They said, "No, you can't play because your knee's bad and you need surgery." I said, "No, I'm playing." So they let me play, and I was, I was limping around, frankly. And when all of a sudden, when they called a blitz down on the 3-yard line or whatever it was, the ball just Ham got the guy, nailed him. The ball bounced down right below me, and I had to pick it up, and I'm starting running down, and I'm thinking, oh, I hope they catch me soon, because this is really terrible, and I'm limping down the field, and it was just ridiculous, and it took forever, and I wanted to lateral it to one of my teammates because they were all running down next to me and behind me and in front of me, and they're knocking everybody else down, and I couldn't lateral to him because I had all my wrists, were all hurt, and everything was broken, and I had broken fingers, and I didn't want to make a bad, flip. So I went all the way. Not that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be tackled, but no, didn't happen.
Andy, over your career, what are some of the major injuries you had?
Well, I had a lot of injuries with my hands. I broke both thumbs twice and broke fingers. But I played every game. I never missed a game, so that was something that you could do without surgery or anything like that. I had some knee problems and the same issue, and I said, no, I'm going to play. I don't care how slow I am. And they'd let me play. I had arm, shoulder problems, had a lot of different things that happened, broken rib, whatever, But I played, I never missed a game, so I was a big believer in Dan Devine's, you gotta play hard.
Well,
Yes.
we all agree that football is a very rough game, but we're watching a lot of players. We all agree that football is a very rough game, but we're watching a lot of players now. Andrew Luck just recently decided to retire because he's tired of the pain. You said you've had 12 concussions. That's a very big concern. Do you think there's a way that we can protect the players, especially, bones and so forth, they heal pretty good. Yeah, later in life you might have some issues, but the brain particularly is very vulnerable. Do you think is the scientific that we can protect these players and still make this a game that everybody's going to still want to watch? You can't sanitize it enough to where nobody can touch anybody anymore, but you know what I'm trying to say? Do you think there's somewhere down the road the NFL is going to make this a game that's still a game, but yet protect the players, especially their brains?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. The NFL has changed the rules on how you can do a lot of things, and you can't play pass defense the way Ham and Lambert and I did. There's just no way they'd allow you to do that today. Because we could knock the tight ends coming across from the front. You could cut him in the knees. You could hit his head. You could do anything to stop him, and that would stop him from catching the ball. Well, that's not going to all be allowed today because it's like a quarterback. You're not allowed to tackle a quarterback or to hit a quarterback's head in any way. Well, you know, I don't like quarterbacks very much. But anyway, that I understand that. But and what's happening, of course, is that because of that, the scores are much higher. You know, the touchdowns, the higher they are. My last year with the Steelers, we had 5 shutouts, defensive shutouts. 0 in, the opponent got 0. That today would never happen because they made it so easy to score. And I think it's kind of bad that's being a defensive player, I don't like that at all.
Any other questions for Andy? Okay, we want to thank Andy for joining us today. Great job.
Thanks, guys.